Tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai, haere mai ki Gordon Harcourt aho. Welcome to this Construction Sector Accord webinar. I'm Gordon Harcourt, I'm the new Communications Lead for the Accord. I'll be hosting these webinars. If I look a wee bit familiar, probably because I did the Fair Go show for quite a few years. So, rapid mobilisation across the sector, today's webinar, looking at current successes, looking at barriers to kicking projects off, using the rapid mobilisation playbook, managing contract risk post-COVID-19. Terrific lineup of speakers from the Accord, from Tactical Group, Civil Contractors New Zealand, the New Zealand Construction Alliance. First up, Andy Cochrane, leader of the Beacons workstream for the Accord. Kia ora, Andy.
Kia ora, Gordon, and thanks very much for the introduction. So back in March 2020, the sector came together through the Accord to develop a plan to deal with the impacts of COVID-19 on the industry. The COVID-19 response plan was developed and split into three phases. Firstly, maintain, which was about ensure the industry could survive the lockdown. We did this by setting clear expectations on payment times and how contracts should be treated to ensure the impact on businesses was minimised. We also provided feedback to ministers on how the wage subsidy and other support measures would be needed to keep cash flowing in the industry. Phase 2 was restart, which was all about getting people back to work safely in a level 3 and then a level 2 environment. We partnered with bodies across industry to establish clear protocols for safe working on site in a level 3 and a level 2 environment. And finally, transform, which was about using stimulus money to refocus the sector on high performance and on building back better. The transform phase was all about moving at pace. Money being poured into projects would not help the wider industry if it was going to be tied up in red tape. There was a perception that procurement rules would be needed to be ripped up because that was perceived to be the main barrier to projects moving quickly. But when we spoke to people across industry, we found that there had actually been examples in New Zealand of people coming together to deliver projects at pace. Usually this had followed a crisis. Government procurement rules are actually a flexible framework that still allow people to move quickly. So, for example, following the Christchurch and Kaikoura earthquakes, alliances were pulled together that brought the right expertise into a single team with a clear purpose and with the authority required to move quickly. So across the country, we had people with experience of working in this environment. And their experiences were that projects usually got held up because of issues with governance, decision-making, consenting, and other issues that are internal to a project as opposed to procurement and time spent engaging with the external market. But there were tricks that some projects learned on how to speed up parts of the process. The Accord's role was to capture those learnings and put them into a format that could help people to understand what they needed to do to move quickly yet safely through each project phase. Oricon were commissioned to pull those different lessons together, and we engaged extensively across industry to make sure those different perspectives were taken into account. The Playbook was launched in July 2020, and it was issued to chief executives of government agencies, while also being promoted across industry through the Accord. It was downloaded over 1,000 times in the first few weeks, and it continues to be a popular tool for people across the sector. I thought I'd summarise some of the key lessons at different phases of the project that will set your project up for success. So firstly, right at the very outset during the due diligence phase, while you're assessing your agency's readiness and capability to rapidly mobilise, it's important to create or enable an organisational culture of urgency by challenging your current approaches to project delivery. Next, when developing your governance gates and establishing levels of authority for approval, be aware of what and when decisions are required and ensure that your senior leaders are prepared to provide quick responses or feedback to the project team. Collectively, your governance team should understand the key elements of the rapid mobilisation and their roles in helping the project to go faster. Key to this will be an SRO with experience in delivering complex projects and ideally with experience of delivering at pace. Next, when developing your project brief and establishing the project's outcomes, make sure the team is clear on what it is trying to achieve with the project. Clarity at this stage will help make sure that that flows through to clarity for tenderers and in the contract itself. Next, when working out what delivery model you'll use, make sure you choose the one that fits with the risk profile of your project. The delivery model should fit nicely with your procurement strategy as well. So then when engaging with the market, you will need to find the right balance between having your project scope and requirements sufficiently designed, and engaging early enough to allow the market's expertise and feedback to inform the project. Ahead of a tender, you should test the market's appetite and availability for the work and collect feedback about the proposed risk allocation and delivery model. And finally, when agreeing a contract, try to use the standard terms and minimize the addition of special conditions as much as possible. This will help you make sure that the risk allocation is fair and reasonable, and that the market is willing and able to deliver your project. So we're going to hear from a few others today about how they put rapid mobilisation into practice to support the country's economic recovery from COVID-19. So where do we stand right now? Arguably, we're still in the transform phase, trying to take this opportunity of increased focus and increased spending on construction infrastructure to deliver on the Accord's objectives of creating a more productive, sustainable and more resilient industry. The government has signalled a strong desire to see environmentally sustainable construction practices be put into place to support New Zealand's climate change commitments. This means government projects in particular will look to take the lead in using sustainable products like engineered wood, innovative practices like off-site manufacturing and prefabrication, and of course the all-important measurement of embodied and whole-of-life carbon. Expect to see government projects prioritise this as an outcome in the coming months. Our ability to move quickly and use sustainable products such as timber has been complicated by supply chain issues, which have at least partly been caused by a slowdown in orders during the COVID lockdown. This has exacerbated the lack of resilience in our supply chains that we already knew about, and it's causing people to replace the just-in-time planning with just-in-case, which is more focused on resilience. The Accord recently commissioned a survey on supply chain issues in the sector. The report will be published soon, but draft findings indicate that most respondees noticed a shortage of materials and supplies, resulting in an escalation in the cost of materials. People are attributing shortages to worldwide shipping issues and delays in manufacturing, as well as delays at New Zealand ports. Respondents said that the materials most affected were structural and non-structural wood products, and it was already having an impact on their ability to complete projects to time and to budget. This doesn't look like it will go away anytime soon, as construction businesses expect that the shortages will more likely become worse in the next 3 months or be about the same, and that the situation will not necessarily improve in the next 6 months. Beyond materials, the results also indicate that a lack of experience or skilled staff is also having a detrimental impact on projects. So how do we as an industry rise to the challenge of resolving New Zealand's housing crisis and infrastructure deficit in this very challenging context? Well, firstly, these impacts will add pressure to current projects, potentially causing commercial issues. The Accord will soon be putting out advice for clients on managing COVID risks in projects. The guidance does not put forward one single right answer, given that risk exposures will differ by project and by contract. Instead, our guidance promotes sound risk management practices and transparent conversations about which party is best placed to control, provide for, and manage the different risks that might eventuate. Many clients are already proactively inserting COVID clauses into contracts to assure contractors that they will be able to claim for the time and cost of COVID-related impacts to the project, which is pleasing to see and will avoid contractors having to inflate their prices to manage these risks themselves. The increased cost of materials is also presenting significant commercial issues. For example, contractors being unwilling to lock in material prices for 90 days or requesting payment in advance. Clients will have to consider a supplier's ability to manage these risks according to their cash flow. Projects at the pre-tender phase will need to be having conversations early about likely lead times and potential cost increases. The risk allocation matrix that will be provided with our guidance should be a useful tool to support these collaborative discussions on risk. There are some behavioural factors that are exacerbating the current situation, such as the inevitable toilet roll style panic buying and stockpiling of materials. To combat this, we're encouraging firms across the industry to sign up to the Accord network. We hope that by joining the network, businesses will get a better understanding of the practices and behaviours that we expect should bring about culture change in the industry and create an industry that people are proud of and one that can deliver for New Zealand. In the longer term, our survey respondents feel that more manufacturing and/or processing should be happening in New Zealand. Increasing our domestic capacity, as well as resolving our skills shortages, will be helped by a clearer and more certain pipeline of upcoming work, which is a key initiative for the Accord. Similarly, our people development workstream is about to initiate a long-term skills strategy, which for the first time will bring leaders from across industry together to allow us to identify the skills we need to develop to set us up for the future. Achieving better outcomes for New Zealand will require us to think differently about how and where we build, as well as how we use our existing assets. We will need to be open to new thinking, which will be enabled by opening our doors to a more diverse workforce at all levels of our organisations. We'll need to embrace technological developments and understand how we can better use information and data. The Accord is here to help join the dots between many initiatives across industry that are trying to break down some of the barriers to change and to help share good practice where we find it. On that note, I will hand it back to Gordon, who will introduce our next speaker, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar. Noho rā.
Thanks, Andy. Nice introduction to the webinar topic today. Next up, Jordan Reynolds. He's the General Manager, New Zealand, and Director for Tactical Group. Thank you for joining us, Jordan.
Yeah, hi there. Thank you very much for having me along today, and really keen to be part of this important conversation.
So, Jordan, building on what Andy spoke about earlier, a few questions for you about using the Rapid Mobilisation Playbook. Do you think the Playbook has helped get projects moving more quickly?
Well, the Rapid Mobilisation Playbook has provided, I think, two key sets of things. One is a great set of high-level principles and guidelines that anyone can engage with at a high level, and no matter what project you're doing. And secondly, a really detailed set of templates and tools that you can actually use to give effect to those. And I think a few examples of things that I think really give effect to that in terms of the guidelines are encouraging parallel work streams, so bringing procurement process in earlier with contract models like ECI, using fast-track design process, so moving forwards with your design while you're going through review of your previous milestone. So kind of running with those parallel work streams is one of the examples of where I really see it giving effect in a tangible way to projects.
Have you got any examples of the playbook being used in practice? How has it helped?
As a project advisory and project management consulting firm, I think the playbook has actually been quite useful for us in a range of ways. So as a consultancy, when starting new projects, particularly with new clients, going through the stages of assessing their readiness, their capability and maturity and ability to move fast with their expected timelines and outcomes has been really important to us, having a really good and frank conversation around what level of support they're likely to need and what options to move fast are actually going to work for them. So I've found that front-end advisory in the playbook really useful as a bit of a process map. Secondly, some really specific stuff around the guidelines on mobilizing quickly, particularly around parallel working again. So getting that design acceleration process in place where you are set up to keep the design pumping while you're reviewing the last milestone in parallel. Get in early stakeholder and interface management with other organizations in and around your project upfront early. And explaining to our clients how this differs from a classic project has been really useful. So being able to use those example timelines and schedule them out in Microsoft Project or your Gantt chart and show the difference of what the compression means to how they might normally deliver it has been really useful and yielded some really good results for us and our clients.
Any areas you're still seeing challenges to rapid mobilisation in the sector?
Absolutely. So rapid mobilisation is first and foremost really reliant on buy-in at all levels in the project organisation, of course, so your governance, your sponsor, but also from stakeholders and the supply chain too. The risk profile for everybody, and all of those aforementioned parties included, increases exponentially when we pick up the pace in a major way. So it's really important that we get the planning and controls framework right together in the beginning. So in particular, I think risk management, specifically identification and allocation of risk, is something that's continuing to be a barrier to not just planning to deliver rapidly, but successfully doing so with a good positive outcome for everyone involved. So I think that's an area where we as an industry have some more ground to cover together.
So looking specifically at managing risk now, what's your advice on the best way to allocate risk?
Well, firstly, I think it's really important to note that all of our contracts, just as they exist, are a form of risk allocation. It's a way to contract out a bunch of services and allocate who's liable and responsible for what components of it. But the view we don't often take is that that's what they do when we're preparing them. We use them as a tool to progress the project through key gateways and milestones and get things happening. So using a risk allocation table is a really good step change and step up towards allocating risk in what I believe is a more fair and transparent manner that enables either a good negotiation if you're working on a collaborative contract model, or alternatively, a really good and genuine tender from the supply chain, depending on whether maybe you're working off a more traditional responsive contract model. But I think it's really important to note that it's important that you do this early in the process. And secondly, you align it with your risk register. So if you're allocating different risk items than those that exist in your risk register, you really want to have a look at that and see if you can correlate them better. The risk allocation process, if you think about it this way, presents a really good opportunity to scenario play what could happen and how you and your supply chain collectively might respond to it. And I guess a final point, and it's a bit of a passion point for me, risk allocation, so I'm adding more points as I go, but risk allocation goes further than just the owner and the supplier. So don't be afraid to add more people to that table as fits your project and your organization and your local context. So who's going to operate the asset when it's finished? It might not be the project owner. How is acceptance and defect risk going to work around that? Do you have any interfacing projects in the area or asset owners who might be impacted? Depending on the model, where does the designer fit into? Their risk profile might not be the same as the contractor. So don't be afraid to take the conversation wider than just builder and owner and map that out too in a transparent way. So lastly, it's a mindset, not just a process. So it's a shift from using the contract as your core function to allocate risk to having a transparent and open conversation about it.
Are there any risks in trying to start too quickly?
Well, sometimes the sense of urgency overtakes us and we move too fast without undertaking adequate planning and getting the right structure and buy-in in place before we rocket off. And it kind of comes back to the old army adage of hurry up and wait. When you're trying to all move really fast, but you don't have the right structures and systems in place to enable it, everyone feels like they're rushing around, but nothing's happening. Or even worse, you progress relatively far down the track and something major stumbles you up, causing a larger time or cost delay than would have happened if you did it the old-fashioned way. So I think in experience, key things that often get missed when you're going to try and move fast and they have the biggest downstream impacts, missing the stakeholder engagement piece. So if you look at your stakeholder matrix that you might prepare in an academic sense with those high interest and high influence stakeholders, those are the ones whose impact on your ability to proceed is going to increase greatly when you're trying to proceed incredibly quickly. Alongside that, your risk of putting them offside and putting them in a conflictive mindset with the project increases too, because they might not feel engaged or even have had the opportunity to be engaged in a time frame that works for them. Remember, it's not in everyone's best interest to move really fast here. So it's really important that we put extra effort and focus into that regular and early stakeholder engagement and let them know that we're moving fast and get their buy-in to the story as to why, if you can. And secondly, from a controls and project management perspective, having a really clear baseline and project plan in place before we shoot forwards. So when moving quickly, we need to be extra clear on what the baseline scope, cost, time, and outcome expectations are, but also have the right systems in place to manage the change that might happen to those things. So change is of extra likelihood when you're moving fast, so scope change or cost change or time change, whereas your ability to have agility in your decision making is reduced and decreased because you're moving fast. You don't have the time to go through those typical gateways and approval processes you might normally deal with. So you need extra force on what that system looks like and to map it out up front and get everyone to tick it and see where they fit into that picture.
Thank you very much, Jordan. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, particularly around being open and transparent during the tender process and collaborating with key partners early. Key points there. Next up, Peter Silcott, Chief Executive of Civil Contractors New Zealand. Welcome, Peter.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thanks, Peter. And Civil Contractors NZ represent the interests of around 600 member organisations in civil engineering, construction, general contracting. Peter, there's clearly concern in the industry around contracts. In particular, I want to hear from you today on the review of the NZS 3910 contract, which for those of you who aren't intimately familiar with it, is the contract underlying at least 75% of non-residential construction in New Zealand. So, Peter, the review, where is it at?
Well, the review is just getting underway, really. We've done a scoping project already with Standards New Zealand involving clients, contractors, engineers, all sorts of professional service organisations as well who get involved in the contract. So we're just getting started at the moment, really.
And what sparked the review? What are the key issues?
We're moving forward, of course, as an industry, and with the Accord, I think there are certainly different expectations about the way we work together. So the contract's a really important basis of that. The NZS 3910 hasn't been reviewed since 2013, so there's been a lot of legislative change, and also obviously that change in the way we want to work together. And the contract needs to reflect that. And that's the primary reason for the review. We're seeing a lot of special conditions being attached to NZS 3910, and that does not build trust. It adds to cost. It impacts on things like productivity, even when people have to sift through those special conditions, so amending clauses within NZS 3910. So if we do a review, the aim of the review is to actually get the contract more up to date with where the industry wants to be.
Who commissioned the review?
Well, the scoping process has been commissioned by the Construction Industry Council. We're just working through the process of who is going to commission the review, the substantial review. I just want to point out that Construction Industry Council had the support of a number of government agencies in initiating the scoping. We're all very interested in getting this project underway as quickly as we can.
So why is the NZS 3910 review so important?
The review of 3910 is important because it creates the foundation for the industry. It's the contract that's most widely used for commercial and infrastructure projects in New Zealand, and therefore it's really important that we all have a good understanding of what that contract contains. The special conditions that get attached to it obviously make that quite difficult, because special conditions can change from contract to contract, and that requires a lot of work on behalf of the industry. I think the sort of changes that we're looking at in this review are going to be around legislative change, but also around how the industry wants to behave, and reflecting, I guess, the principles of the Construction Accord.
Once it's done, once the review's over, what difference will it make to the sector?
I think the main thing will be that the contracts are better understood by people, and that's a really important issue. I think there is a lack of understanding at the moment, because each contract is really different because of the special conditions that are attached. So we're hoping to get more consistency that will enable participants in the industry to build up their knowledge about how the contract works, and hopefully that results in better relationships right from the word go right through to the end of the project, and better relationships definitely mean, from our point of view anyway, at civil contractors, better relationships mean that we're going to get better outcomes in terms of the infrastructure we build, the commercial buildings we construct.
Thanks for your time, Peter. Of course, we'll be looking for the results of the review, see what changes can be made to provide greater contract consistency. Next up, Paula Evans, Chief Executive of the New Zealand Construction Alliance. Thank you for joining us, Paula.
Thanks so much for having me and for inviting us along today. It's a great opportunity for us.
Paula, the New Zealand Construction Alliance was born from some of the challenges, the difficulties facing the construction sector. What is the Alliance? Why was it formed?
New Zealand Construction Alliance is an alliance or a partnership of 9 commercial construction companies up and down New Zealand, covering all of the regions. It was born out of the need to be able to deliver national contracts, but keeping it local. So keeping it in the regions, keeping the labour in the regions, and looking after and growing the capabilities. One of the partners was offered a job that covered all of New Zealand. There were 16 sites to rebuild them. They'd done a great job in their region and went, yep, we can do it. And then thought, hang on, the reason we do what we do so well is because we are in our region, our local supply chain, we manage all of that so well. So how could we find companies like ourselves that could help us in a national delivery of projects? And that's where we came about. So now, a partnership of 9 covering all the regions.
So you kicked off in 2018, you've got 3 years on the clock. What's improved in that time and what challenges are still out there?
Yeah, well, it was, as you said, it was born 2018 on the back of, we got a Ministry of Social Development rollout to upgrade all of their offices up and down New Zealand. So what we have been able to do and what has improved, we started off with 3 partners when I came on board, and I've been able to reach out to the regions and find the culturally aligned partners in each of the regions to join the Alliance and to help us deliver that project. So as that project's grown, our processes have grown, and the simplicity of working together has really built. Still, labour workforce is a real challenge, especially in a lot of the smaller regions. And with one of our founding principles, which is all of our partners must employ their own labour workforce, and commitment to apprentices, we're committed to that growth and helping it, but it is still a real challenge. So that would be, one of the biggest challenges.
You mentioned you believe in a hyper-local approach to the construction supply chain. Tell us more. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, I think, certainly, and that was where the foundation of NZCA came from, and that was around those trusting, strong relationships in the regions. It's about keeping it local. It's looking after your local subcontractors and keeping a real family and community feeling to the business. And that's certainly, it's a really big part of what we do. It's, we as NZCA would never dictate or try and control our partners' supply chains in the regions. We're not about national supply deals or things like that for products, as we really support our partners having those strong relationships in the region and looking after their local people.
What are some of the specific challenges you're seeing in terms of contract risk?
Well, this was one of those questions that when I knew that we were going to be doing this interview, that I went out to my partners and said, how are they finding it and what are their greatest challenges? It's certainly around the risk allocation and how much risk main contractors continue to take on. And the more main contractors agree to some of these clauses that they're uncomfortable with, that they don't tag them out, that they don't exclude them, that this risk continues for the industry. Another big risk at the moment is fixed pricing, and we're in a very unstable, uncertain market with supply chains and products coming in and price increases. We've had dramatic prices across the market, and there isn't always room in the contracts to allow for that, especially if they're longer contracts or they've been paused for time, like say, for example, with COVID, a lot of contracting stopped for a period of time, and yet the same conditions are still in place as before. And the other one is around zero risk zero risk appetite from central and local government around consenting risks, accounting for leaky buildings and earthquake risk and three waters. So there's quite a few different factors. Most of the partners that were sort of summary of what they all felt, but it certainly is that the amount of risk that the main contractors are taking on and just being able to share that.
Thank you, Paula. Fascinating approach. Some questions now for all our speakers. First for Jordan. What tools in the playbook have you found most useful?
So my answer to that is I think it's a balance of the principles and guidance level inputs in there, which makes it a bit of a one-stop shop. Whether you're a organization that delivers $1 billion or $500 million projects day in, day out, or you're an organization that's delivering $200,000 to $3 million minor capital works programs, there is something in there that you can engage with, whether it's mindset level or guidance level. In balance to that, the sort of second side of that seesaw is the tools and templates that are there. And sometimes it's about picking a couple of them that complement you and your organization and rounds out your suite of kit that you have available. And sometimes it's, grabbing the whole swag of them. But in my experience, I think the ones that I've seen really add tangible impact pretty quickly to how people see the project and how it starts moving. It's those example timeframes at the back end of the playbook, which give you some sort of high-level rule of thumb timeframe and milestone indications that you can kind of use to pull together a really quick Gantt chart and get people talking. They might not be perfect and they're not intended to be, but they're definitely a quick starter when you're looking to get something together in a rapid sense for rapid mobilization, of course. But also the mobilization checklist is something really useful to go through, even if you're whiteboarding it, not working strictly from the template. It's a great conversation piece. That's the value in it. And lastly, the risk allocation table, which we talked about a little bit earlier, it's really useful because it's super accessible. And if you need to bulk it out and add more to it, you can. These templates are there in a base sense that are accessible no matter your project size, but don't be afraid to start playing with them and building on them to make sense for your level of complexity and scale. I think the willingness to do that and ability to do that is what makes it quite adaptable.
Next one for Peter. What are you seeing as the biggest risks in managing construction contracts?
The largest risk that I see is that particularly contractors don't fully understand the contract that they're signing up to, and that may sound unusual, but with each contract being different, and sometimes 100 or more pages of special conditions, altering conditions within the contract, that creates real problems with interpretation. And often people don't make that connection until there is a problem within the contract. So I think that's a big risk. What adds to that risk, of course, is the short period of time that often some of our contractors are given to actually consider the contract. So the tender comes out, and within 2 or 3 weeks, they need to have put a credible bid in on that project. And that doesn't allow a lot of time to understand hundreds of pages of special conditions. It doesn't allow a lot of time for them to look at the real risks within the contract and how they may mitigate those risks.
Last question is for Paula. You've got 9 partners across New Zealand. Are you seeing the same risks countrywide, or are they more regionalised?
Well, this is another question that I went out to the partners and had a talk to them about. Certainly there's some common challenges across all of New Zealand. Labour and workforce and keeping skilled staff retention, things like that are certainly they're everywhere. And as the main centres are really picking up again, they're feeling it as much as the smaller regions. Another area, certainly for the Hawke's Bay, they've got real issues with James Hardie and plywood supply. So different regions are starting to run out of different products or will be hit at different times. But certainly it's around staff retention, getting good staff, the challenges with immigration, stopping people coming in, and being able to keep our workforce moving and keeping up with the contract and the work that's there. So that's a really big one, staff retention and keeping the next generation coming through.
Thank you to all our speakers. Some excellent, got it all there. Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. If you've got any questions, please use the Construction Sector Accord email that you see on screen or visit the website. And I hope you'll be back for the next in our series of Towards High Performance webinars. I'm Gordon Harcourt. Mā te wā.